Greetings! In today's video, I want to go through some news, some findings, some info that I found while looking online through my various bookmarks related to the watercolor world. And there's nothing that would really qualify as breaking news, but there's a lot of fun things, and I thought it would be interesting to share and to kind of discuss with you guys in the comments what you think of this stuff. So I'm gonna start with a little roundup of a bunch of new releases in terms of colors. Some of them are perhaps not all that new, you've probably heard of them before, but I wanted to round up everything that I saw. And of course, this is probably not everything, but if you've seen some other releases, you can share the info in the comments. So I will start by going over what I've talked about recently, which is the new Daniel Smith colors. I'm not sure what's up with that, but on their Instagram, there's a bunch of new photos of their latest releases. When I did my video featuring their new colors, I don't think any of these images were up, so they kind of posted everything on the same day. I don't know, but it's really interesting to see more photos and more images of these colors, especially one next to the other. Like I said in my dedicated video, Daniel Smith tends to overcorrect their marketing photos of the swatches. Some of them fare better than others, but oftentimes they don't really look like the color itself. So it's really interesting to see these colors in photos with other elements in the photo, so it gives us a bit of context. They seem to be focusing on the three colors that are mixes for Valentine's Day. I mean, the three colors are indeed reminiscent of some candies, but in my opinion, as an illustrator, I really don't feel like these three are the main highlight of this release. But, you know, what do I know? Moving on from Daniel Smith, I know, a lot of people are fed up with the super granulating colors. There are many offerings out there, and they keep on releasing new ones. And I know, for me, it's the kind of color that I really like to look at. I find them fascinating. They're beautiful, but it's a bit more difficult to use them. So recently-ish, Mijello has released a full product range that is focused on having colors that have this double color, double tone, granulating characteristic. They called it their Tourmaline range. It's within the Mission Gold watercolors, but they kind of made it some sort of separate collection. The paints come with a different label, they come in a different box. You can also get them open stock depending on where you shop. And really, the colors are beautiful. It's a kind of complete range of color. You get a bit of everything. You've got yellows, red, pinks, blues, greens, browns, all that. If you remember the Schmincke granulating colors when they came out, they were a bit more centered around more muted colors, in the sense that there are not that many granulating yellow pigment, and unless you go into fluorescent pigments for that texture, you're very limited. And the issue with fluorescent pigment is that they're not light fast. So I feel like Schmincke really focused on having light fast granulating mixes that look interesting, and a lot of the other offerings in terms of granulating color palettes, they perhaps ventured into having more variety in the colors, but sacrificing light fastness in the process because they've used some sort of neon dyes in their mix. So to keep with this idea of having new offerings for granulating colors, Holbein has also released a sub-range of granulating colors. As far as I know, they don't have a specific collection name, but they are really interesting as well. You can get them in a set or open stock. It's kind of difficult for me to say because they're not available to me here in Canada. There's some sort of weird trade agreements that makes it more difficult to order Holbein items online depending on where I shop. Anyway, long story short, I haven't seen these firsthand, but I've seen the swatches and I think the swatches are beautiful. As far as I can see online, most of these use light fast pigment. There's a few that use BV10, which is basic violet 10, which is a dye. It's this dye that you find in opera pink, so it's this really bright, punchy pink color. It's beautiful, but again, if you use the ones with the neon dyes, you gotta keep in mind that they might be affected by sunlight. I like the Holbein granulating color range. I think they did something a bit different, which is refreshing. They didn't just do what Schmincke did or what another brand did. They kind of went on their own idea a bit, even if some of the colors end up being similar, because again, there's not infinite pigments out there. We're kind of limited with the pigments pigments available. But I feel like the colors are really interesting. To me, they have a lot of illustrative qualities to them. They're not as muted, and I think that's really interesting. I really like Holbein. I think you guys know that. So for me, these are particularly appealing, but again, I like all the paints and I really enjoy a good swatch. I wish they would all come up with dot cards, so you could buy that and get to swatch all the colors. But anyway, now sticking with Holbein, they've released the granulating colors, but they've also released a watercolor set of what they call luminous colors. If you're familiar with other products from Holbein, you might have heard this luminous qualifier before. It's usually the one they attach to their neon paints. So you have this luminous set within the acrylics range, and now you have this luminous set within the watercolor range. Keep in mind, these not light fast. Okay, there's really not a world so far in which neon dyes are light fast, but they are really fun, and especially under UV light. I find them particularly interesting as a creative tool, but also they're not for everyone. This luminous selection has 12 colors. It seems to be a really nice offering in the sense that they don't skim out on some of the colors, but again, it's heavily leaning towards the pink. You have a good few pinks and magentas, a few purples, and then some yellows, oranges, and the colors that are always a bit more difficult to get in terms of neon dyes and colors are blues and green. You could always mix them together and have even more option, but just straight from the tube, it's really focused on the pinks. As you can see from some of the swatches, there's something with the neon paints that grant them this particular texture. It looks like granulation. I'm not sure it is granulation, but it's really interesting in mixes, so that could be something to keep in mind. Neon colors on their own are kind of hard to use, but if you mix them with something else that's a lot more muted, you might get something really interesting in there. This is, of course, something that I would like to swatch firsthand and put them under UV light just to see how bright they get. And I think it's fun, but yeah, also not for everyone. Moving on from the granulating stuff particularly, there's a few little things popping up from companies that we're familiar with. The first one on my list is the fact that now A.Gallo offers tube paints. This is something pretty unique. I know that a lot of painters were waiting for one of those artisan paint maker to release tube paints because a lot of people prefer tube paints to pans. Pans are much easier to manage. The fact that they're dry gives them a good stability as a product. Tubes are trickier to figure out because you gotta find the right balance to make sure that it doesn't get all weird in the tube, depending on the pigment you use. There's some pigments that just don't like being in a metal tube, like malachite, so it can be difficult, but also exciting. I'm really glad they figured it out. I think it's really cool that they can offer tubes now because a lot of people, like I said, are gonna enjoy that, and it also gives you the option to refill your pans if you run out of a specific color. Not all of their colors are available as tubes, but it's still a substantial amount of them, and I'm really impressed that they figured it out. Moving on to Schmincke. This is not really new. These have been out for a bit. I'm not sure if I've mentioned them before, but I've recently took the time to really look at the colors, and I think some of the colors are really interesting. And what I'm talking about is their latest release of Horadam limited edition watercolors. There are 5 colors. They are only available as 15 milliliters tube. So the colors, the 5 colors, 3 of them, according to Schmincke, were made in collaboration with artists that have been working with Schmincke for a while. So you kind of get these 3 custom colors designed by artists. And then you get 2 other colors that are not attached to anyone, but that are really interesting regardless. You get a purple color that is named Wild Purple, a green named Cologne Bridge Green, a kind of blue-gray that's named Shadow Gray, a very bright turquoise blue named Atoll Blue, and lastly, buff titanium. I don't know why, but I feel like buff titanium in this release is kind of the odd one out. First of all, how is it not already part of the regular range? Because this is such a good basic color to have available. But also, it's just so not underwhelming, but it's very beige. both in terms of literally beige and metaphorically beige. It's kind of neutral mindset. Anyway, I think all of the 5 colors are really beautiful. There's a few that interest me more than the others, and the only reason why I haven't really made any kind of hands-on video about them is because I don't have them. Another one of those things that I would love a dot card because I cannot afford to buy all of these paints. But it still would be really fun to do some sort of focused video on these and to be able to show swatches and compare swatches. I would love to do that, but yeah. And finally, a last little new color info that I found is from Da Vinci. Da Vinci is an American company, a bit difficult to find outside of the US, but it really depends on where you live and what's available to you. They've released a color that they call New Gold. It is a mix of 2 pigments, PR101, so pigment red 101. It's usually, you know, some sort of reddish brown. You find it in Venetian red, you find it in a lot of these reddish earth hues. And they've mixed it with PY83, which is a yellow pigment. It is a warm yellow pigment. Both pigments in this mix are kind of hard to pinpoint in the sense that each of them can come with a few variations that would make it possibly difficult to create the mix on your own to replicate this color. I'm mentioning it because this color looks like a good contender to fill the gap left by quinacridone gold. I don't think it's a dupe for quinacridone gold, but for some people it might reach this spot in their heart that is left empty by the disappearance of genuine quin gold. According to Da Vinci, it's a color that is transparent and that granulates somewhat. It looks really beautiful. I would love to try it. It's the kind of color that I reach for often. I really like this kind of warm orange, yellow, gold color. To me, that's very fall in North America, so I like that. That's it for the new-ish colors. I have a couple of extra things that I want to mention. The first of them is a really interesting article on Just Paint. Just Paint is the sort of publication from Golden Artist Colors. Golden, for us in the watercolor world, they're the ones that make the core watercolors. And they've posted this really interesting article back in September, but it refers to some availability issues with natural earth pigments. What that means is, you know, that yellow ochre, Venetian red, burnt sienna, all of these earth hues that we are familiar with, because there's at least one of them in every single set out there. But there seems to be a general problem with sourcing these pigments, and their article goes in depth about the issue and their solution, how they're gonna deal with it. It's an interesting read if you're more on the pigment nerd side, but I thought it was relevant to mention because it will affect some of the colors we're familiar with, and it's always interesting to know these things in advance, because if something is really, really key to your painting practice, like a specific color that you just can't live without, it's good to know so you can at least stock up a bit. Not that I encourage stocking up, but I understand it. And finally, a last thing on my list that I sort of saw recently, and I didn't seek this out particularly, but when I saw it, I had to group them together in my head. But I've seen 2 companies release new plastic sets. I know, not everyone likes plastic palettes. It has its advantages. It's relatively lightweight and very sturdy generally, and kind of really convenient because it doesn't rust. Watercolors, we use a lot of water, metal tin, rust. The rust can get in the paints and kind of corrupt the paint, and it's messy. So I'm not against plastic palette. I like plastic palettes. I'm someone who likes both plastic and metal palettes. For me, it's more about the real estate that a palette will occupy rather than its material. But I'm rambling. Anyway, Schmincke has published a video on Instagram of one of their Schmincke Academy palette, and it's really designed like the metal tins we're familiar with, but it's made from plastic. And I thought that was super interesting. I would love to get my hands on that palette. I would love to try it out. I love Academy paints. If you're not familiar with them, they're one of the best student ranges out there. I did a video some time ago comparing Academy and Horadam, so if you want to see more of that, I'll put the link in the description. But anyway, I like the Academy range, and I would love to look more closely at this plastic version of the metal tin. As far as I know, this is the first time we get a plastic version of the metal tin. Following the same general idea, Rosa, the Ukrainian paint company, has also also released a plastic palette that has a really interesting look and layout. I haven't seen this one before, so perhaps it's available in other ways. What I thought was particularly striking about this one is the way the lid is split into various mixing areas of different sizes. I know it's not mind-blowing, but it's still not something we see a lot of. In my experience as an illustrator, there's times when I need just a bit of a color, there's time when I need a lot of a color, and most palettes have exactly the same divisions for the mixing area. So even if you need just a bit of a color, well, you have this big space for it. And I think it's really interesting to see something a bit more versatile for that. Also, the paints look great. They're half pans. I haven't seen half pans from Rosa before. Now, the only issue with this set is that I have no idea where you can find it. I'm not sure it's, widely available yet, but it's something to keep an eye on. And again, from what I can see, it seems to be their studio range. I haven't tried their studio range. I've only tried the professional range. The professional range is really nice, and I really like Rosa in general, so that's definitely a set that I would love to try and that I will keep an eye out for. But for now, it's just something cool that I've seen and wanted to share with you guys. I mean, that statement kind of sums up the whole idea of this video. I saw a bunch of cool watercolor things out there and I got no one to talk to about them. So I'm making this video. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this nerdy rambling about watercolors. I would really love to hear your thoughts in the comments, to make this kind of a discussion, like all of us paint nerds talking together about cool paints and whatnot. I think it would be fun. So please let me know what you think. Thank you so much for watching this video, guys. I really appreciate it. If you want to talk about paints with other people who like paints, I have a Discord server for this community. The link is in the description. It's completely free. You can join up and we try to really nerd out about paints over there. So it's a lot of fun. I hope you have a great day. See you all in the next video. Bye bye.